let's start off here, everybody. We want you to get a pen and paper ready because we're going to give you some really awesome content specifically on how to get out of this mess that we have talked about. We call it together the 5CR model, and we called it that because it's going to make it easy for you to remember the 5 C's and the R that we need to get out of this mess. So the first C is competence. So Jim, why don't we talk a little bit about why having an important skill base is so important in order for you to be self-reliant?
Well, let's just look at, let's say our neighborhood, whatever neighborhood you live in, is all of a sudden the only part of the world you've got to worry about, all right?
Mm-hmm.
In your neighborhood, you've got, let's say somehow so that the illustration works, you're protected from all the rest of the world for the short term. And so all you've got to do is worry about the welfare of the people within 1 mile of your own front door. Okay. Now, they know that too, so all of you look to each other now as the only society that you have to deal with for the moment, okay? And you have a community meeting. So all these people get together and you say, okay, what's our goal? And someone speaks up and they say, our goal is to be able to survive and do well and live pleasant lives for the indefinite future, for as long as we can. Great. What are we going to need? Food, shelter, defense, da-da-da-da-da-da, right? We're going to need all the fundamentals of human existence, all right? So what do we do for food? I don't know. Who's good at food? Ray says, well, I got a garden. I can not only produce from my garden, I can show you how to do a garden in your own yard. Cool. Ray's the food chairman for the moment. Not forever. He's not the commissar of food. Ray's the food chairman for the moment. Okay. We need defense because there's wild animals and scary things out there. Okay, Jim's got weapons and knows how to use them. Good. He's in charge of teaching us all how to develop weapons and use weapons wisely, how to defend ourselves. Okay, Paula's good with money. She knows how to teach us how to record what we have that's valuable now, how to manage it and share it and circulate it in the ways that make sense. Great. Okay. Who's in charge of water? Who's in charge of buildings, and who's in charge of building supplies? And should we agree not to do certain types of activities because that would diminish the resources for the other people? Like you don't pee in the water supply, right? Things like that. What are we going to do about waste? What are we going to do about nutrition and so forth? How about educating our kids? Who's good at that? Okay, I can teach them how to make their bed. I can teach them how to add and subtract. I can teach them how to communicate and how to write and read. So all of a sudden we start sharing these skills, not because we want Ray to become the food specialist and advance his career. We all want to become good with food. And so Ray is teaching. And what's the goal of teaching? To make me self-reliant as it relates to that subject, food.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so everyone's learning all of the skills. You could call this cross-training in a company, right? So everyone's learning to be, now not everyone's learning to be as good at food as Ray is, but we're learning from Ray so that we can become good enough to get by and maybe excellent later on. So we start sharing all these skills and acquiring the competence, the skill set to survive and contribute to others. Because if I'm self-reliant, I have something to give. Like the story of the Good Samaritan. Well, if the Good Samaritan had been a dependent, emotionally bankrupt drug addict, the Good Samaritan would never have been remembered because he wouldn't have been in a position to help somebody else. You've got to get your own act together first. That's why on the airplane, when there's an emergency and the oxygen masks fall, they say, put your own mask on first. Well, no, my kids, I want to save my kids. Yeah, but if you're not breathing, you're not going to be able to help them. So get some oxygen, self-reliant, then help the person next to you. Well, I don't want to come first. You got to come first. You're the only resource you've got. So learn to get your own act together. Competence, competence, competence. Become skilled. Yeah, but at what? As many things as are reasonable. Become good with money. Become good with nutrition. Become good with health and fitness. Become good with health care. Be able to fix injuries and illnesses and things like that without having to go to a doctor or hospital. Okay? Become good with basic supplies for daily living. Become good, etc. That's the whole point of competence as number one, and without number one, never mind the rest of them. Would you agree with that part, Ray?
Oh, I absolutely agree. If you don't have a skill set that you can leverage to be able to take care of yourself and those that you care about, you're basically a sitting duck in the water, and you're not going anywhere, because competence is the starting point for everything. So
Yeah.
for those watching this video, I really would encourage you to take some of the items that Jim has mentioned here and add to that list. What are the areas of your life and in your business that you have determined that you need to increase your skill set in, and objectively evaluate where are you right now, what's the gap from where you need to go, so that you do not feel that you are dependent to a large degree on others. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that you need to be a master of everything and not be able to barter and connect with others. You need to pick what it is that you want to be amazing at and figure out what you're willing to trade to benefit from other people's specialties, coming back to Jim's example.
You bet. And learn critical thinking. Learn basic math, basic science, and physics and biology. Just learn the fundamentals that they used to make an important part of the school curriculum, so that you know enough to know how to solve a problem, fix a broken tool, take the appropriate action in an emergency.
And I would add to that, when we think about critical thinking, anytime you hear somebody say something to you, whether it's on television, the newspaper, popular media, or videos that you're watching, just like this one, stop first and analyze it and understand what's the basis from which they're speaking from, what is truth versus reality, and verify and fact check, because many times I think we tend to believe what we're told, and that can have a cascading spin-off effect of dominoes that take you down different roads that you may not want to go down.
And you need to ask questions like, is what they just said fact or opinion? If it's opinion, it may be fine, but who's shaping their opinion? What resources or sources or what mentors are they turning to get the guidance that causes them to form that opinion? So you need to learn independent thinking and then find mentors, but for heaven's sakes, have more than one input. If everything you get from NBC News, shame on you. If everything you get from Fox News, shame on you. If everything you get is from the National Association for the Non-Victimization of People that we don't agree with, shame on you. Get multiple sources of input and then make decisions based on what in your heart and soul you believe is right and true. Not what mom or dad told you was right or true, but what, after analysis and critical thought, you've been able to arrive at that conclusion on your own. It's like in a religion. If you go to, let's say, the Baptist church, and all your life you hear the Baptist church point of view, that's fine. It may be right for you. But somebody years later, they say, why do you believe this? All you can do is quote the other people. If you didn't go through the thought process on your own, if you didn't go back and read the gospel, that they're preaching from on your own, and do your own thought and prayer about it and come to your own conclusions, you don't have a belief. You got a memorization. You're reciting their poem instead of stating your beliefs.
That's about being an independent and active thinker in your life for interpreting the world around you. And one thing I'd also add to what we've just said so far is learning to understand motive. What's the motive behind the message and who you're hearing it from? What motivates them, and where does that motive come from? And trace motive. And then if you do that, in many cases, you'll be able to separate what is factual and can benefit you, and what is not and has an angle that is being presented to you. So I think that's important too.
I think you're right. So number two in our formula is confidence. So how does one build confidence?
I think one of the big ways in which we build confidence is directly related to what we just talked about, which is building competence. Once we are competent and we know that we're competent and we know a lot about a subject, it really helps us in being confident. And And we were just talking about this also just before the interview, being able to have great public speaking and communication skills, to be able to stand up and articulate yourself on what you're passionate about, what you're confident about, really can help with confidence. What do you think there, Jim?
Well, I think a perfect example of that is the Dale Carnegie Institution. Dale Carnegie, back in at the end of the Depression, was teaching public speaking skills at the YMCA's, and people were flocking to it because it had such a powerful impact on their ability to do what they did day to day. Their confidence ended up being the great output, not their public speaking. Public speaking was simply a process through which they developed the underlying strength, which is confidence in their ability to stand and communicate and deal with things. See, when you learn to speak to other people effectively, there's a lot going on there besides just the speaking. First off, you have to have a thinking or a belief or something that you're trying to express. Then you've got to turn that into words. Then you've got to figure out how to get those words across to other people in a way that they would hear it and understand it right and be affected by it in the right way. So it's not just about articulating it, it's about interpreting it in a way that your listeners will be affected in the appropriate way, whether it's motivated or moved or touched or reminded or educated or whatever it happens to be. So using public speaking as a medium to develop personal confidence to deal with the world is a very, very, very good tool. My grandson, who I mentioned earlier, age 13, has acquired black belt status in Taekwondo, a martial art. Well, he had to go through so many steps, awkwardly, poorly, making mistakes, getting injured occasionally, not in big ways, but dealing with all of that to get to the point where he qualified for a higher belt, that his confidence is huge compared to what it used to be. Plus, he doesn't feel as afraid when there are threatening-looking people around him. He knows he can handle himself. Same thing's true for the public speaking when it's coming to handling yourself communication-wise.
So when we think about public speaking, we just talked about it's not just what you say, but how you say it, and being able to demonstrate and communicate a point of view that holds your audience's attention. So ultimately, it's the end result of a lot of other preparation work that has gone into being able to deliver that message. So as a takeaway,
it can't be learned independent of the action. It can only be truly learned. It can be understood independent of the action, but it can only be learned through actually doing it in front of people. Whereas Taekwondo, another good example of that, or karate, or any of the other disciplines, they can only be learned through the doing of it, not the study of it. Study of it precedes the doing, but the doing it's like years ago in San Diego, Steve Lewandowski, a friend of mine, a colleague, who's an announcer, or at the time was an announcer for polo matches. He said, "Have you ever been to a polo match?" "Never have." He said, "Well, come to Del Mar, to the polo grounds. We're having a match and I'm announcing, and you can come as my guest." Cool. So Paula and I went, and he even acknowledged me over the loudspeaker, which was kind of cool, and we watched this wonderful polo match. And then later he said, "Have you ever taken a polo lesson?" I said, "Oh, heavens, no." He said, "Well, take one." And I said, "Well, no, no." And he said, "No, Jim, take one." And I said, "Okay." So I go to the corral where they have the horses, and I meet the instructor, and he says, "Okay, get on the horse." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about polo. I've never had, are we going to go over the basic?" He said, "Get on the horse." I said, "But I need to learn the fund." He said, "Get on the horse." Okay, so I get on the horse. He said, "Here's a helmet, put it on. Here's a mallet," or whatever they call that. And he said, "Now ride your horse out into the arena." I said, "But wait, I don't know anything." He said, "Jim, you learn polo by doing. Let me explain. Here's what you're going to do. Now, come this way and do it." And within like 5 minutes, I was riding the horse and actually hitting the whatever they call the polo ball. I was actually doing that within 5 minutes of arrival. Good heavens. And I went on for an hour, and I learned many things in that hour. And then, we gave the horse a rest and got my little annoying self off his back. And I stood there bow-legged and said, wow, that was amazing. But the point is, there's no way to learn polo without being on a horse in a polo match.
So the key point that we're driving home here is, one is to have the competence of what to do. The second part is to use the competence and actually do it. And the third thing we talked about in one of our examples here was public speaking. I would just throw in an example here on the Taekwondo. I actually used to be a Taekwondo student as well. And there's a very big difference between learning your katas and your patterns and how you fight in the dojo and actually going into a sparring match where you have to apply it with somebody who is using the same technology, so to speak, against you. It's a total different game. It's the same thing with driving a car. Think back when you first drove a car, and you can know, conceptually speaking, got to put on the gas, the foot on the pedal, steer the wheel. Do you remember being white-knuckled and be like, like
I was learning on a standard shift, so I had the clutch to deal with and all that. I was terrified.
So the key takeaway, everybody, we talked about competence and confidence, and getting confidence comes from doing. Jim, what's the next part of our model?
It's courage. So courage is not something that you do when you're not afraid. Courage is acting despite being afraid. So if you weren't afraid, you couldn't be courageous. Courage doesn't exist with the absence of fear. So there has to be, some unknown or some challenge or some resistance in order for courage to emerge in a person. And courage comes from knowing the natural laws and being able, through your own experience, like we're saying, your competence and your confidence by doing it, through your own experience, you've proven this law to be so you can be courageous going into the unknown, because at least you know what the fundamental laws are that make things work or not work. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll add to that, and I'll say it's taking rational action in spite of fear. So by understanding the natural laws that surround us, we can look at the situation and decide, is this something I want to do or something I don't want to do? And because we are dealing with conquering irrational fears, not logical fears, we take a rational action and we end up finding out that the outcome may have been not as bad as we initially thought. And to kind of make this sound more understandable, let's use an example. So if we are in an airplane, and we're in a perfectly good airplane, there's nothing wrong with this airplane, and you say to me, hey, Ray, let's jump out of the airplane. It will be great. It will conquer your fear of jumping out of an airplane.
Yep.
Well, a couple things jump out to my mind. Number one is do I have a rational fear or a logical fear or an illogical fear of jumping out of a perfectly good airplane?
Yep.
And I would say that that's a pretty logical fear of jumping out of a perfectly good airplane.
Reasonable, rational fear. By the way, I did it at age 62. And so
I saw your picture on Facebook with it.
Really fresh memory for me. The fear was absolutely rational. We're 13,000 feet above the ground. Without the airplane, I'm 100% dependent on the parachute. And since I've never jumped before, I'm also 100% dependent on the guy on my back who's wearing the parachute. I'm strapped to him.
So in a scenario where we have a perfectly good airplane, one might elect not to jump out of the airplane, and that would be a fine decision to make because there is a chance that the parachute won't open up, right? Now, let's suppose we take the same airplane. This airplane is going down. You know that if you don't jump, you have no chance of survival.
Yeah.
Jumping out of the airplane has all of a sudden become a very rational decision with a parachute.
That's right?
Yep. So being able to understand the natural laws around you, to take rational actions based on the circumstances that you're in, is what we're talking about, and operating in spite of fear that exists, because that's the only way
And
you're
this
going to expand
also
and grow.
applies in seemingly benign situations, like being in a meeting and being afraid to speak up, afraid that you'll be judged or criticized by the others. Being in a job interview and being intimidated by the person interviewing you, going into a courtroom and stating your case and defending your cause, against an adversarial attorney, or in front of a jury of people that are going to judge you, talking with a policeman when you've been pulled over for a ticket, those sort of things, day-to-day situations where many times people are intimidated into not acting. And it's not because they're not right. It's not because they weren't doing what they should have been doing. It's because they didn't have the courage to speak up. And courage comes from competence built into confidence through practice, and then applied in a threatening situation, which stimulates courage.
A few years
has to fit together.
a
That's
few
why
years
congruence is the next one.
Right, but before we go to that one, a few years ago I had this opportunity to speak to 1,000 people, and this is the first time that I was facing a large group, and it was an interesting experience in that I had prepared a lot for it, so I had the competency of what I was going to talk about, and I was fairly confident. I still had those butterflies feeling inside of me, which is rather irrational fear. I mean, here I am only giving a talk. It wasn't like I was going to war with guns and people shooting bullets at me or anything. But I had this emotional, physiological reaction to being on stage. And I remember when I cut through that fear and went out on stage and talked and let the passion erupt out of me to communicate a message, it dissipated. It went away. And I was in the element of enjoying that moment in time to speak. And I think that as our viewers are watching this and are thinking about how they apply this in their own life, many times when you take that action and go forward with courage, you enter into a new position where you realize it's going to be all right, and you're going to do fine, and you're going to grow and expand from it. And sometimes our imagination might be worse than the reality.
No, almost every time. Almost every time. And the trouble is when our mind is so well built. When we go into an unknown situation, our mind fabricates for us potential obstacles. It's part of a problem-solving process. But people abandon the intellect and go into the emotional side only. And that's where they run into trouble. But what's going on is all these fears are simply your mind saying, what if there are wolves? What if the sky is falling? What if you run out of food? What if nobody likes you? Okay, fine. Those are the problems to solve. Do not stop there. Take each one and say, okay, if there are wolves, I'll do this. If there is famine, I'll do this. If people don't like me, I'll do this. Now all of a sudden, because you've thought it through, you're able to be courageous. Whereas previously, you had gone from obstacle, default to the emotion side, which is the feel good at all costs, right? Instead, I'm saying learn to reflect on what's going on, to be objective about it, separated enough that you can think about it wisely, critically. And that's a big thing. My friend Kevin Buck, who's a philosopher, he says, without reflection, there's no true learning. We don't learn when we hear information. We don't learn when we read information. We learn when we reflect on what it means and put it into our knowledge base in the appropriate ways. But without that reflection, there's no learning taking place. You could say, I read 75 books this year. How many did you understand? 75. How many did you apply? Well, but I read 75. Right? It's not about what you take in, it's what you process effectively so that it shows up in your life. And then you can be, in our next competence, congruent in the ethical strength of everything that you do and are. In other words, you become a person who's the same person on stage and off stage, same behind the scenes as out front, the same person sitting at the dinner table as you are leading a big meeting in front of powerful people. Right?
Absolutely. Congruence with a strong set of ethics that are used to um, help you formulate how you behave with yourself and with others. And some of the sources that I think can benefit our audience in taking a look at this subject is Aristotle, Ayn Rand, Ralph Waldo Emerson,
Yep.
Napoleon Hill, and of course Buckminster Fulmister. Excuse me.
Fuller. Yeah, easy for you to say.
Fuller.
But, and all of this boils down to know what you believe. Know what you believe is right and what you believe is so and not so, and let that be the foundation of your ethical base so that everything you do grows out of that and is consistent with that. So if you hold yourself to certain standards, and by the way, that's the only way you're ever held to standards except as a victim. You could say, well, in a prison you're held to certain standards or they'll hurt you or kill you. Yeah, but that's at the very primitive animal level. We're talking about at the human thought level. If you know what you believe is so, if you know what you believe is right and wrong, and you set that down in writing, and you live your life according to that, you can be an ethical person, a congruent, a moral person. You can do what is right and what will show in your heart that it's right and live a life of meaning. And you're much more likely to be a compassionate, giving, helping person if you do so than if you don't go through that process.
One of my favorite statements to ask somebody or questions is, and when you meet somebody on an airplane or you meet somebody and says, so what do you do is always the most common question, right? It's the most boring question for me. I like to ask the question, like, who are you? What do you stand for? What's important to you? And if you come at interactions with people from that perspective and you have also thought about the answers to those very valid questions, you will start to operate at a higher level, and you will be much more of a self-reliant individual when you know what it is you stand for, what your backbone is all about. And I think that's an area that all of us need to continuously hold ourselves accountable to, that set of beliefs that we hold true, and live that every day.
Yeah. They say the worst subjects in the world to get onto with other people are politics and religion. And the reason is most people have not thought through what their belief system is. They have not tested their beliefs against criticism to see if it'll hold up. And by the way, if you believe something and someone criticizes it and it doesn't stand up to that criticism, you don't believe it, you just memorized it. Mm-hmm. So your beliefs are the things that you've proven to be so, at least from your point of view. And that point of view needs to be an enlightened point of view, not just a selfish little, I'm going to come to this conclusion point of view. So if a person is going to have a congruent life, it's got to start with them knowing what they think is so, and then structuring their life around that and living that way day to day. And what happens is it handles our next C. It makes you impervious to criticism because you're not worried that someone disagrees with you. You don't mind getting into a discussion of philosophy or religion or politics or whatever it happens to be because you know what you believe. And you can say it and talk about it without getting angry. Someone can disagree with you and you can say, well, I don't see how you came to that conclusion. Or, I see how you came to that conclusion. That makes sense too. It's like Socrates said, life unexamined is not worth living. Well, that's pretty profound, but let's look at it in a little milder context. If you don't hold up your belief system to criticism, to other points of view, other examples, other applications, then you never really know whether it's true. You're just saying, I hope it's true, I hope it's true, I hope it's true, I hope it's true. It's like you believe there's a heaven and then you die and you look around, assuming that's possible. You say, oops, there's not one. Dang, I wish I'd checked out other alternatives before it was too late.
So from what you're saying here, I think our audience can understand that being impervious to criticism is really about being authentic to yourself and trying to find the truth, trying to evaluate and seek the truth and understand reality and perceive it correctly. And that involves critical thinking. That critical thinking goes through this whole process that we're talking about here. And
But
just to give some resources.
Not only critical thinking, but the willingness to be wrong. See, if you're not willing to be wrong, then again, you don't have a belief. You have a shield. You've got a defense that you're using to protect you from whatever the reality is, because the reality might hurt.
Right.
Like I told my staff when I used to have a full-time staff, I outsource now, but I used to have full-time staff for many, many years. And I told them one of the rules when they went to work with me, I said, the truth is not only okay, it is absolutely mandatory. If you ever lie to me, in a small way or a large way, I will consider that a retroactive 2-week notice of termination. And you can leave my office and office building that moment. And a lot of people said, yeah, I get it, the truth's important. I said, no, I am serious as cancer. This will happen. Please don't take it there. So if the truth is bad news, if the truth is you made a mistake, if the truth is you lost money or damaged something, if the truth is you were negligent, okay, I can handle that. But if the truth is you lied, you're gone.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have to trust what you say to me and make my decisions based on that. So how do you get a society where people tell the truth? Make it okay to tell the truth. Never kill the messenger. Just deal with the circumstance and handle things appropriately. It's like our prison system. What's the prison system based on? Well, it's not based on making things right. It's based on punishing those who were wrong. Well, what a stupid idea that is. Well, no, that'll stop them from... No, it won't. Never has. It just grows the size of the prison system. So we need to rethink a lot of the ways that we're doing things and figure out better ways. Yes, there are people that need to be put in storage to keep everyone else safe from them. But there are an awful lot of people that did something wrong, and we'd be better off having them go make it right again than putting them in storage and feeding them for the rest of their lives.
Well, that's probably a conversation for another day, but it's amazing how many people we have in the American prison system relative to our overall population. But that's totally another conversation.
Yeah.
So coming back to our model here, we've talked about being impervious to criticism. The last piece to this model is all about relationship intelligence. How do you take all of these aspects of being a self-reliant individual and be able to interact and connect with others in a meaningful way that leads to harmony and positive output for everybody involved? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay, well that's my company trademark, relationship intelligence, and what it means is being intelligent about
relationships.
Yeah, Bueller, anyone? Relationships. In other words, looking at relationships, a direct connection between people in which value is exchanged, that's the way I define it. Looking at relationships as assets or potentially liabilities. So if your life is filled with interactions with other people, some of those are actually relationships. Many of them are just transactions. Hello, how are you? Fine, how are you? That's a transaction. I need to buy this. Here's my money. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks for your business. That's a transaction. That's not a relationship. Relationship is where value is exchanged between the people, and it's an ongoing connection. So if your life is filled with relationships, and you tend to be, according to some people, the common denominator of the 5 people you spend the most time with, well, then who you choose to spend your time with most determines the quality or nature of your life at that particular point in time. So we can be more reflective, more objective in backing off and looking at our relationships intelligently and thinking, who do I need more time with? Who do I need to get closer to? Who's missing? What kind of people are not in my life that I really ought to go find? Which people in my life are affecting it negatively, and how could I reduce the percentage of my time that I spend with them, or change the nature of my relationship with them so that it's less impactful? So that we think intelligently about all of this. When you come back to the fundamentals of why does it exist and what makes it work, you're going to come back to the same conclusions, for the perpetuation of life, for the enhancement of life, and self-reliance is at the core. So it all comes full circle because we're actually not going around a circle. We're drilling down to the bedrock that's under everything else. What's the purpose of life? Living fully, giving all that you can give and contribute, and getting all that you can and enjoy and savor, and making that experience better for the world because you were here, instead of simply taking up your space until you get off at the next stop.
Thank you for that. That was great. When we think about how this model, let's just do a quick little recap, make sure everybody was able to take down the key components of this blueprint. We started this conversation today, Jim, as a really honest and truthful conversation about the state of the world today relative to where it once was, yeah. at least in terms of the the U.S. country, the country of U.S. And we've gone through this blueprint, which we call the 5CR model. So we started off talking about competency, confidence, courage, congruent with strong ethics, impervious to criticism, and relationship intelligence. Mm-hmm. We've talked about the importance of being a truth seeker, to understand the world around us so that we can make informed and smart decisions that move us forward so we can expand and experience more of what life has to offer. And we hope, we're not done yet, but we hope everyone who's watching this can appreciate the fact that we're providing a perspective to you that goes right to the core of what the problem is and the prescription and the solution to start making things better. It's something you won't find on the television news network. You won't find it easily accessible because there is a predominant culture in place today that is taking us down one road, and we're trying to show you that there's an avenue, an alternative to take you down another road. So with that recap, I'd love to go to the next step and ask you, Jim, based on what we've talked about today, let's talk about what this emotional payoff is. What's possible for our audience if they really take to heart what we've been talking about?
Well, it all starts with making an absolute commitment to do it. And when you do that, the payoffs that start coming are you start feeling safe. You start finding more meaning in your life. You start getting up in the morning and you keep excited about things because you know you're making a difference. You know, and your life grows. It becomes more abundant. You know, if the purpose of life is to live fully and abundantly, to contribute through all your gifts, then this is a way that guides you toward a fuller expression of who you are. And you're constantly growing and learning and achieving. And you talk about something that builds charisma, you will be irresistible. When you're bringing that much positive energy and value to the world, other people want to be around you. Other people want to grow up to be like you. You know, one of the things, I admire my son very much. He's my best friend in the entire world. And something I've said to him often is, and I've said this for like 30 years, I want to grow up to be like you. Now, how many people have ever had their dad sincerely say to them, I want to grow up to be like you? And I mean it sincerely. He is a good person, a person I admire, and if I became more and more like him as I go through my own life, I think that would be an absolutely fabulous thing. So the payoff of being self-reliant is that nobody sees you as needy. Nobody says, uh-oh, brace yourself, here comes Jim, right? They all say, hey, look, it's Jim. And you look like good news wherever you show up. So the payoffs are huge for becoming more self-reliant. Also, what's the quickest way to get a new job? Be worth something. Now, I don't mean just net worth. I mean bring value. Bring the ability to come into a company and solve problems instead of just working on them. Come into a company and give them new ways to reach out to new customers and come up with better ideas and save money and save time and save effort and all that sort of thing. See, when you come into a company and say, hey, I've been looking at your company and I see several things that could be done better or cheaper or faster or easier, then the company's not saying, look, we're not hiring right now. They're saying, tell me more about that. What can you
Mm-hmm.
do? You know, we don't have any openings. Hey, I'm not worried about openings. I just see some need, and I've got some ideas. Well, we could make an opening. You know, we don't have a title for you, but let's just call you helper. And
Problem solver.
yeah, how much money do you need? Okay, that's enough. We'll do that. You know, and you know, I tell you what, being self-reliant makes the world want more of you. But
So
you know,
that's
you look at the roadblocks in this. What is it that keeps people from it? Well, first off, it's like Thomas Edison said, the reason most people don't recognize opportunity is it comes dressed in overalls and looks like hard work. Well, it is hard work, but so is dealing with things from a victim point of view.
no, that's very very well said. And coming back to this emotional payoffs, if we just kind of recap a little bit here, as an individual, you're able to first of all take care of yourself, take care of your direct family. You're able to take care of your friends if you choose to, and being the relationships that you have around you, and you want them to do well. You are more of a pillar of society as opposed to something on society that is banking on and dependent on others in a direct manner. When it comes to advancing in the workplace, irrespective of your level, from being the lowest level in the company all the way up to the highest level of the company, you come with renewed vigor, energy, excitement, a new approach to looking at opportunities to make things better. If you are an entrepreneur, being able to do that for your customers. At the end of the day, being more self-reliant equals living life more fully, more openly, and being a magnet for all good things in this world. So we hope you've seen that from everything we've talked about here today. And Jim started to take us down the road of looking at roadblocks, because it's not going to be easy. As Jim said here, it's going to take work. It takes work to build competency. It takes work to be courageous, to have confidence, to be able to develop emotional and relationship intelligence. It takes time. It takes energy. But what's the alternative? Jim, what's the alternative? Are we going to live a life of dependency and be cowered into a little corner and call that living? That's not living.
No, it's not. And I remember when, you know, I used to be that way. I started off, I was working for other people all the time. I was working as a government clerk for a while. I did that. And I remember hating my work. I remember just dreading going to work in the morning. I remember I was working as a bill collector for a while in a bank. And I hated that job. And I remember going to the restroom and just sitting there, didn't have to use the facility, just sitting in the restroom just to be away from my work because I hated my work so much. You know, so I'd take like 10 or 15 minutes just sitting in the restroom, just not being a bill collector. And I did that for 2 or 3 years of work, you know, being a bill collector and such. And then I got out of that and I went into sales, and I took a job selling motorcycles for a friend who had a little dealership. And then I took other jobs, and I sacked groceries for a while, and I ended up in a government agency for a while. And then I got inspired by Earl Nightingale, like I had mentioned earlier, and decided to go in the field of personal development. But I didn't have any experience. I wasn't an accomplished person. I had to start from the ground level, talking about what other people were saying, and build my own beliefs, my own skills, my own competence, my own confidence, and become a person who had something to say that was worth listening to. But I'll guarantee you the first few years, I wasn't worth listening to unless I was quoting somebody, which is fine when you're starting. But I tell you, you know, people are way too willing to say, well, so-and-so won't like it. My husband or wife will disapprove. I'll get resistance. Other people will judge me. They'll think I'm a loser. Or they'll think I'm a jerk. Or they'll, you know, well, get over it. I got all that. You know, I had people saying, really? I mean, Jim, what? Kid me. You know, it's not that big a deal. And that's what I heard often. What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is the little things that over time determine what kind of person you become. The big deal about smoking is not one cigarette, it's one cigarette again, right? I stopped smoking after smoking 2 packs a day for a decade or longer, I stopped smoking in 1974 on January 25th. Well, how do you know? Because that day I decided to stop smoking for life. I didn't decide to try to quit. I didn't quit smoking. I became a non-smoker, and non-smokers don't, anyone, smoke.
Smoke. You made a
So I
decision.
gave away my engraved cigarette lighters. I gave away my designer ashtrays. I told my friends and family, I am a non-smoker. Please don't offer me a cigarette. I'll turn you down, but I might be rude at first. So just don't even offer, because I'm a non-smoker now. It took me 3 months of withdrawal to get over the physical problems of stopping smoking. And after that, it took me probably 2 years to overcome the habitual tendencies. But I became, on January 25th, 1974, a non-smoker for eternity. And I've never smoked since. Well, have you ever had the urge? Absolutely. But I made the commitment, that's forever. Likewise, I decided after 28 years of being overweight and out of shape, in 1976, I weighed 200 pounds on a 5'9" frame. I decided in November of 1976 not to lose weight again. I'd done that lots of times. Not to go on a diet again. Nope, I'd done that lots of times. I decided to become, for the rest of my life, slender. Now, what does that mean? Is that just a play on words? No, that's a completely different mindset and habit set. I had to become self-reliant on being a slender person, just like self-reliant, not dependent on cigarettes to make it through a day, right? So to become slender, I had to change my eating habits, not change my diet, my eating habits, which is my forever diet, right? I had to change my exercise and fitness habits, and all of these involved also changing my attitudes. But I had to change the behaviors first and commit to that behavior change. Then I had to change my knowledge so that I learned more about health and fitness and well-being and all that. Then, I had to change the behaviors day to day that would lead me into a situation where I would abuse food or cigarettes or whatever the thing had been. Same process that an alcoholic has to go through to disengage from alcohol, or a drug addict to free themselves from drugs. Those are all dependencies. That's all victimhood. It is not self-reliance. Self-reliance in all those contexts is achieved in the same sequence of steps, which we're representing here as a C, 5 C's with an R. The fundamental underlying steps are the same, but it all begins with one thing that's non-negotiable: the absolute, permanent commitment to do it. No matter how difficult it is, you find a way to make it easier. No matter how painful, you find a way to make it hurt less. No matter how complex, you find a way to simplify it. You commit to do it, it happens. You commit to try it, it absolutely will fall apart.
Oh, that's when I hear what you're saying. One of the key things that jumps out for me that I wrote about in my book was an emotionally committed decision.
Absolutely.
You made an emotionally committed decision in each of your examples, and then followed many of the things we've talked about today in our program to get from where you are to where you want it to be. We started this conversation with roadblocks, talking about work and the fact that there's a lot of work. We talked about there's going to be resistance around you and judgment from others, and it could be a lonely journey in many cases. So now let's talk about some of the strategies to deal with these roadblocks, and start off by surrounding yourself with the right people, which we've talked about, a mastermind of individuals who are committed and interested in the success that you will have, as well as your ability to contribute to the success of the other members of your mastermind. What are some other ideas we can add in here?
If you want to be a long-distance runner, start hanging out with people who run. you know. And if you want to be an Olympian, don't hang out with occasional joggers. Hang out with people that are committed to the higher levels, right? So choose your level, but associate with people that are into whatever it is. If it's a rock collector, find other people that are gemologists and you know, that sort of thing. If it's, name it, you know, you can find a community of people, especially with the internet and with Facebook and LinkedIn and all those resources. You can find communities of people with similar interests. So get other people around you and then increase the percentage of mentor effect in your life. For me, I got Earl Nightingale's recordings on audio cassettes back in those days. I had 48 audio cassettes, each about 20 minutes long, and a little portable cassette player in my car. And I played that all day, every day, whenever I was in the car. On weekends, I would sit it next to me if I was working in the yard or barbecuing or something like that, or just sitting around the house doing other things. I would play those recordings to reprogram my own attitude, my own knowledge base, my own point of view toward the world. I had a point of view that I was going to be ordinary and insignificant. I wanted to be someone who mattered. So I had to go gather and get to me and commit to using the influences, the books, the recordings, things like that, the people who would bring to me that healthier, bigger, more abundant point of view. And everyone can do that. You can certainly do it online. You can do it through resources like Customer Engagement Magazine. You can do it through, you know, go to Cathcart.com and get my company resources. There are myriad resources now compared to what there were 20 years ago. But surround yourself with inputs. Shape your own environment intentionally to give you the inputs, because success in any venture is made, M-A-D-E. M, you got to have the mindset that fits the goal you're going after. A, you've got to have affirmations. You've got to talk in terms of the new you, not the way you used to talk. Well, I'll try. Gee, I hope it works. Well, what if, you know, I hope we don't have any problems. All that's loser mentality coming up in articulation. So change the way you articulate and affirm. D, daily habits that lead you on the new path. And E, environmental influences, people and things that reinforce your new point of view.
You know, your story got me thinking, and I was thinking back where I was in 1987. In 1987, I was on the couch with my dad in Toronto, Canada, reading page by page Think and Grow Rich.
Wow.
That was the first time I was introduced to that book. Here I am. I was basically a 12-year-old kid being introduced to this book at that time. And it became an important book for me, and I began to take actions, little actions at the time, to get me on the road to where I wanted to go. But anyway, let's just fast forward. A couple years ago, I was invited to speak at the International Napoleon Hill Convention in Kuala Lumpur. And here I am speaking on stage with Napoleon Hill's grandson to my right, the CEO of the Napoleon Hill Foundation to my left, and all of that was created as a result of being able to leverage this body of work and interacting with like-minded people to get me to where I wanted to be, which was to be on stage communicating and sharing this message with others. So anybody watching this video can apply what we're talking about. Yeah. It's right there for you to grab and take.
The odds of that happening are a zillion to one against it, until you decided to commit to that path. And once you made the commitment to follow that new path and stayed the course, then that became a very logical and ultimately predictable outcome. Of course, that would ultimately happen because you took the time to transform you.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about first steps, first physical action steps that people can take to get this whole thing rolling. What do we do?
Let's do this. This is a really exciting section of our broadcast, everybody. So make sure you got your pen and paper handy. We have 5 key points to talk about. So number 1, and you're going to see there's a metaphor in this scenario here. Declare your personal independence from others. Declare your personal independence. What does that mean, Jim?
That means you write your own Declaration of Independence. Like Og Mandino in his book, The Greatest Salesman in the World, you know, he had the scrolls. From this day, I will, da-da-da-da-da-da. And you just write down what you're personally committing to. and you say, no matter who disapproves of me, no matter what obstacles come up, no matter how long it takes, I am committed to this new, better path, and I'll find a way. And it may not be anything like what I think about it going into it, but I'm willing to go in this new direction because I believe what Ray and Jim have been saying is true, and based in truth at least. And so I'll find what's right for me, and I will stay this path because clearly it makes so much more sense than doing what all the thundering herd is doing. Okay? So first, you declare your personal independence from criticism, from other things. It's going to come. Just say, okay, I get it that that's going to happen, but I'm independent of that. I'm going to become self-reliant. Number two.
Number two, define your personal constitution in terms of your values, your morals, your character traits. Who is it that makes you who you are? Tell us more about this one, Jim.
You bet. So if you've declared independence, you got to have a constitution, right?
Right.
And the constitution is it's your statement of, this constitutes my beliefs and my intentions toward the world. You know, this is the way I see life. This is the way I see me. This is the way I see the world. This is what I'm going to do. You know, we the people. There you go. And you just let it know. You know, I the person declare these truths to be self-evident. You know,
I the individual declare that this is my personal constitution and how I will conduct myself.
When in the course of my events, well, anyway, you come up with your own constitution or statement of, you know, like a manifesto or a set of beliefs. Now then, next, you establish your own personal Bill of Rights. You know, so you got a Declaration of Independence, a Constitution, and a Bill of Rights. Well, you define what you believe your rights and responsibilities are in the context of the society you choose to live in. Like, freedom of speech, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to become confident and competent at speaking your mind in appropriate ways, and you're not going to diminish yourself and hide your light under a bushel, as so many people do, because they don't feel the freedom to speak up for what is right and what is so. Next, that you're going to declare your freedom to believe whatever you want to believe, no matter whether Aunt Edna disapproves of it, or Uncle John believes that that's absolutely wrong and doesn't like people like that. Your beliefs are your beliefs, and that's between you and your God. Go for it, right? And find a way to make peace with the rest of the world as a result of your beliefs, okay? Because none of this is about believing anything that is antagonistic to other people, okay? It's all about making life more abundant for everybody. Next one, personal defense. Declare your own right to defend yourself verbally, defend yourself ethically, defend yourself physically, whatever happens to be, financially, reputation-wise, that you have the right to bear arms, you know, whatever those arms appropriately would need to be, for you to defend yourself against aggressors, against crooks, against corruption, you know, whatever it happens to be. And another one is your right to private property. You know, that's one of the things that makes a free enterprise system work, emphasis on the word free. If people don't have the right to create something and own it, then everything's part of the collective and we're a communist society. So what makes freedom possible is the right to ownership. And if you write a book, that's your book. You own the copyright to that book. You can register the copyright if you want to, but you own the right to it even if you don't register it. It's yours, right? If you build a house, that's your house, assuming you built it with materials you own on property you own, right? So declare your right to have your own personal belongings, your own personal private property, be it intellectual or physical. And you say, well, what, you know, in a marriage, it's a total blending. Yeah, I get that. But even at that, you know, there's your private space and his or her private space. There are certain things that need to be still within the control of that individual, even though many things are shared. Okay? Ray, what's next?
Well, our next one is defining the laws you will live by, which is really about the ethics that you hold yourself accountable to and the rules that you will use for daily living and how you conduct yourself. What would you like to add to that?
I think it's just that, there are plenty of laws that are imposed on us externally, but we need laws that are created and applied internally on ourselves. Like, it could be something simple and trivial for daily living, or it could be something profound like, making a commitment never to do harm to another person, except in self-defense. And I have a little tiny, it's more of a codicil than a law. When I find it tough to get up in the morning, my agreement with myself is if I move my foot past the edge of the bed, I'm committed and I'm going to go ahead and get up. So I may lay there for 15 minutes before I do that little action, but I know that once I do that little action, I'm in, and it's time to get up and greet the day. So it could be silly little simple things like that, or it could be profound things like, in this business, we tell the truth, and if you don't, you're fired right now. And that applies to me as the boss as well as you, the employee, right? So if I'm the one that's lying, then I need to be called to account on it, and there needs to be some, compensation that I have to make that makes me not want to do that, right? So find the laws that you feel you should and could live by, and make them a big deal to you. Because they're not going to matter to somebody else. They only need to matter to you.
And combining that with the ethics that you hold yourself to and who you are as a person, to allow you to be a person of integrity that can be confident and assertive vis-a-vis the world that you engage with, can only happen if you have a strong bedrock that you rest against, and that is your ethics. So right. The last piece of our action plan is to implement, guys. Implement the action plan we've given you here with the, as we call it, the 5CR model, and start with looking at your skill set to build those competencies.
Absolutely.
So, Jim, this has been an amazing conversation, and we have covered so much. I feel like we have gone from one end of the spectrum all the way through to coming out the other end. We may have started this conversation a little bit on the dark side, but we hope everybody realizes that we weren't doing that for any reason other than to help motivate, instruct, and inspire you to take hold of your life, your role within it, to be the best that you can be, to have the most life that you can have. And it is a necessary requirement to deal with some of the objective reality and the challenges we have around us.
Yeah. So is it ready for my last word?
Yeah, Jim, I want to hear, what's the last word or phrase that you would use to sum up everything we've talked about?
Well, the phrase that I live by is out of the Bible. It's John 10:10. It says, I've come that they would have life and have it more abundantly. But I want to boil that down to an application phrase for our listeners today. And you've heard it before, and you'll hear it again and again. I'd love for you to live by this. If it is to be, it's up to me. How about yours, Ray?
I think that phrase encapsulates everything we've been talking about. And when I think about a lot of what we've been talking about, it's similar to your phrase, if it is to be, it's up to me, but I'm going to go with the word individualism. Individualism is an important word that sometimes gets cast aside in today's society as being something that is not what we want. It's something that is maybe not ideal, but I think it is imperative that we recapture the essence of who we are, and we apply the 5CR model to be able to be more self-reliant and to be able to take care of ourselves the way we need to. And that starts with having full respect for who you are as an individual and the role of an individual in society at large.
I agree. Ray, this has been tremendously stimulating, way longer than either of us thought it was going to be. But I think as we cut this into pieces for people to be able to consume it more efficiently, we're going to really serve people well. I feel very good about this dialogue. I appreciate your making it happen, and I look forward to both of us hearing a lot from the people who were listening today and who listen in the future, so that we can feed this self-reliance movement and make it something that profoundly improves the world.
Thank you so much, Jim. And I'd also just like to make sure everybody knows how they can get back in touch with you. Can you please share your website, and we'll make sure it's placed in the magazine as well.
It's my last name, Cathcart.com. And you can also find me on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Jim Cathcart. I'm pretty much everywhere.
And for everybody who's watching this, wherever you may find it on the internet or in the magazine, know that we create content like this on a regular basis as part of Customer Engagement Magazine. If you're new to our publication, go to customerengagementmagazine.com, put in your name and email address, and we'll start to share some great content with you that can help move you from where you are to where you want to be. So this is Ray Stendel signing off together with Jim Cathcart, wishing you the very best.